Welcome to Another Cup, part of the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network, presented by Kavoya Specialty Coffee, where coffee is always a collaborative voyage. Another Cup is devoted to conversations with suppliers, customers, and all the relationships in between. In Episode 8, Kavoya's Director of Operations, Charlie Requat, talks with Logistics Manager Colleen Walsh about some of her diverse experience in logistics, shipping green coffee across the planet, and missiles in the Red Sea. Charlie.
Well, hi, Colleen. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here in Rhode Island in the fall weather.
Sweater weather.
I love the sweater weather.
We're here today to get to know you, where you come from, your background,
my purpose in
why
life.
You're in coffee. All right. So let's start with the beginning. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up all over the country. I was born in Pennsylvania. And my dad's job took us all over the place. So I lived in Kentucky, Southern California, Connecticut, Northern California. And then I, as an adult, have done the same. So I've lived in your hometown of Houston, Texas. I lived in Chicago. I've lived all over the place. So I'm not really from anywhere per se.
Child of the world.
I am. Although I've lived in California for the most years out of my moving around.
So that's home.
It is, yeah. Right now it is. I lived in, where I am now, I've lived for about 12 or 13 years. It's the longest I've ever lived anywhere my whole life. I counted it up, and I think I've lived in 27 or 28 houses in my lifetime.
Wow. And with that background, how did you end up
where I am today?
Doing logistics.
I, in my 20s, did a lot of different things. I loaded bags onto airplanes for American Airlines. I worked as a paralegal. I did a bunch of things. I knew some guys who owned a shipping company, and they were looking to hire people, so I went to work for them, having no knowledge of what they were doing, and that's how I got into it.
And what were they shipping?
They, the part that I was working for them in, we would ship overdimensional cargo from the U.S. all over the world. So things like big generators, wind turbines. We had customers that would come into the U.S. and buy an old factory, and I would have to go to that factory and have a crew of people in there that I would supervise to take everything apart and ship it from the U.S. to wherever that person was. A lot of it was going to China. So that was my start in this, was doing overdimensional cargo, which was a really fun, interesting way to get into it because everything was a puzzle. You know, how do you get this from point A to point B? And I was shipping that stuff that you see driving down the highway where the wide load and, you know, we'd have to do it at night so they could lift the power lines to get through and all that kind of stuff. So it was always super interesting and fun. And a lot of times I would have to go to the port to be there when they loaded it onto the ships to help supervise that part of it as well. So it was really a fun, interesting way to get into the business. And, you know, it wasn't containers and all that. So it was always something different.
Never the same day twice.
No. For better or worse.
And what was the wildest thing you had to move?
I mean, it was usually big generators and big engines and things. And it was always just, you know, as a woman in this industry, I would go to the ports and I would have to stand there with a bunch of longshoremen and explain to them how I wanted them to lift up this big piece of machinery and how to rig it. And usually they wouldn't really want to listen to me too much. So, I mean, I always remember going to Baltimore and doing that one time, and it was it was a big engine that we were trying to load on, and they rigged it wrong. And I told them that they did it wrong, and they tried to lift it anyway, and they almost dropped it. So that was a pretty interesting one. And then they finally listened to me and said, oh, I guess you were right.
Yeah. So after that job, what was in between coffee and then and now?
So I went to work for a company that imported goods from China after that. And so I would go to China 2 or 3 times a year and visit the factories and negotiate with factories for pricing for buying goods. And then I negotiated the ocean freight rates, of course, to bring in the stuff into the U.S. I did that for several years. And then I went and worked for Philips Electronics. I was their North American contract negotiator. So for anything that Philips was shipping into the U.S. from anywhere in the world, I negotiated all their ocean freight contracts. So I would go over to Europe and sit in a room with a bunch of ocean carriers for a week and negotiate ocean freight contracts, which was always interesting. I did that for quite a while. And then I came to work for Olam. I had another job in between that was a little bit of a short-lived. The company kind of got bought, and then it was like, all right, I'm out. I was going to Mexico once a month for a week on that job, which was interesting but time-consuming with travel. And then I interviewed for Olam, and I started with Olam actually in New York City. I worked for Olam's dairy division. And so Olam exports dairy products all over the world from the U.S. So I was working in that division first. And I did that for several years. And then I moved to Chicago with Olam for that division. And I had made friends with a lady in our New York office who was in the cocoa division. She moved into the coffee division, and we were Facebook friends. And she had posted a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge on her Facebook profile, and she's like a New Yorker through and through. So I'm like, what are you doing in San Francisco? And she said, oh, we're opening a new office in Northern California for our coffee division. And I had family out here or out there and said, hey, if you're looking to hire anybody in California, I'd love to move back. And she said, well, as a matter of fact, we are. So that's how I moved from the dairy division to the coffee division.
Wow. I mean, if you think about it, you started in dairy, you go to coffee, maybe you'll
a little bit of sugar,
exactly,
a whole cup of coffee,
right? And then it'll be complete.
Yeah.
So then tell us, how long have you been working in coffee, and what does a day in the life of Colleen at Kavoya look like?
I joined the coffee division probably 13 years ago now, so it's been that long, which is a long time. And a day in the life of Colleen is varied. So in the last several years, I'd say a large part of my day is spent trying to get ocean freight rates for us that'll work for us to get coffee into the country. When COVID hit, everything went crazy. Ocean carriers went from charging us, a small amount of money for a container to ship to a large amount of money. I mean, they were looking for $10,000 to $20,000 a container. So in the last several years, that's been a lot of my daytime, working with the suppliers, just trying to get things moving, getting things here so that we can have something to sell to our customers.
Yeah, I remember that. That was amazing. 10, 20 grand. That's like 25, 50 cents a pound.
Yeah, that was not a good time. And I've been doing this for a long time. I'd never seen anything like that. I mean, never. The carriers are notoriously not super swift about how they do their pricing, but I mean, that was insane. They made literally billions of dollars in profit during that time frame.
Well, shipping lines, let's stay there. What do you see in the next 12 to 24 months on that front?
Well, during COVID, because they made billions of dollars, a lot of the ocean carriers went out and got new ships built, and it takes a year or two to get ships built. So all of that capacity is now going to come back into the market, right? The ships were being built as of a couple of years ago, so now they're done. So they're going to start coming into the market, which is going to be helpful to us in that they're bigger ships, they're newer ships, they're going to be put into the existing fleets. So that should give us some stability with the rates and better transit times in theory, because they'll have ships to use to plug into some of the slots. They're also going to be taking ships out of service, though, because there's going to be new environmental laws put in place with the emission standards. So they're going to have to retire some of their older ships or sail those ships more slowly, because if they slow steam the ships, the emissions go down. So they can kind of cheat the system a little bit and use the old ships, but just go slower, which isn't good for someone like us because we want faster. So I think in the short term, in the next 12 months, that in theory, things should stabilize somewhat because there'll be more capacity coming into the market. And the rates from Asia already are dropping. It doesn't really help us. We don't ship coffee in from Asia, but that's indicative of the rest of the world. So I'm hopeful that things will stabilize. But, it's after COVID, we had a period where things started to stabilize. And then all of a sudden, the Red Sea starts a war and the ships are getting hit by missiles. So you never know what's going to happen. But if things are stable politically and geopolitically, then I'm anticipating it should get better for us.
Hopefully we stay away from force majeure and general average and
no missiles.
No missiles. So what advice do you have for coffee roasters when it comes to logistics and preparing?
My biggest advice to people would be build in way more time than you think you need. So if you think you're going to be out of coffee in a couple of weeks, order that coffee now. Even if you are, what you would consider a few days, like you're up in the Oakland area and you think, I need to get some coffee from the annex and I'm going to need it, a couple weeks from now, put your order in earlier than you think you need to. And in terms of if you're doing any kind of direct trade, certainly where you're getting the coffee shipped from origin, all of that, everything takes a lot of time. We send shipment instructions. They have to make the booking. The coffee has to get loaded. It gets on the ship. It gets, it transships through all these ports around the world where it may sit for a day or it might sit for a week, and then it gets to the port. Maybe it gets to the port and it gets off the ship, or maybe it gets to the port and the longshoremen are on strike, as this happened to us now twice in New York and Vancouver. So that, so it's build as much time as you possibly comfortably can in terms of, being able to hold coffee at your location, but just build in more time than you ever thought you'd need. That would be my biggest piece of advice.
Something at some point will go wrong.
Exactly. The truck breaks down, the ship gets stuck.
Customs hold, an inspection.
Yep, it's always something.
So what is your favorite thing about working in coffee?
I know a lot of people say it, and it's maybe a cliche, but I like the people. I mean, I think, it's like going to SCA and meeting everybody for whatever reason for a product that makes you jittery. It's a very chill group of people, I think. Everybody's fairly nice and laid back and interesting and has a story of some sort, because I think people don't get into the coffee business just like you don't go to college to get into the coffee business. You end up in the coffee business somehow, and most people have a story as to how they got there, which is always pretty interesting, I think. So I really like that aspect of it. I like going to SCA for that reason. I like talking to the customers and suppliers and seeing everybody face to face. So I really like that. Plus the fact, for me personally, I've been drinking coffee since I was a kid, so getting the free coffee is a huge added bonus.
Absolutely. Is there anything about coffee logistics that you think most coffee roasters don't know?
I think the timing of it is the thing that most people don't really understand or grasp fully, how much time it takes from the time that you say, I want that coffee, to the time that coffee actually can get to you.
Yep. Well, and let's face it, we live in a world where you order something online and it's at your doorstep, within 24 hours.
Yeah. And even if we wanted to, coffee isn't something you can air freight, right? So if you say, well, you can, but it's such a heavy commodity that, it's one of those things where there isn't really a better, quicker way to ship it. Some commodities you can say, well, I put it on an airplane, it'll get here in a week, it'll be at my door. Coffee, you can't really do that.
Yep. The only thing I've ever seen air freighted is COE coffee, and people who run just-in-time inventory who get caught out.
Yeah.
A container by airplane is expensive.
It's very, very, very expensive.
What is the most surprising or unlikely thing you've encountered working in coffee logistics?
Well, I think having some of our containers hit by a missile kind of tops the list. I'd say that's the most surprising thing. I think, otherwise it's, containers are containers. No matter what you've got in them, you're going to be shipping them. I'm always, I don't say surprised, but it's always interesting to see the new places that we start shipping coffee from. That's always something that's fun to see. And, I get these requests from the traders to get an ocean freight rate from someplace that I'd never even heard of. And so it's always kind of interesting and fun to do that. But yeah, I think it's just the way that, especially in these last several years, the way that the ocean freight has just been something I've never seen before in my working life, of just the crazy. And that's not really coffee per se, but it's just in this times we're in. Yeah.
You just got to expect something's going to happen along the way and be able to pivot.
Yeah. It used to be you just would worry about, what are the ocean carriers going to do this year in terms of their contract rates? Are they going to be reasonable or not? Things are going to go. And now it's just, I have no idea what's going to happen.
Nope. One question, one of the things that I learned over the last 4 or 5 years is the phrase cut and run, which is an old phrase when pirates used to be coming into a port, and so they would have to cut and run, and that's when your container didn't get loaded. And we've had it happen a couple of times with storms.
I haven't really heard of cut and run. That's an interesting one. I don't know if anybody... they don't call the port. I've seen that, but that's...
They were in port on one of them, and a hurricane was coming. And they didn't load the container, even though they were in the port. And they said it, like in the email, we had to cut and run.
Interesting.
Which I had to investigate. Right? There's always some history to it that makes it a little out of sorts in current times.
Yeah. No, I think because I've been doing this so long, I've heard pretty much all the phrases and everything over the years. But there's a carrier who I won't name, but they're privately owned, so they don't have to care. They don't have shareholders. They do what they want to do, and they'll just announce that they're going to not call that port today. We're not going to go there. We're going to skip it, which is always, always a fun thing when you have a container sitting there waiting to ship. Or on the flip side, if they're going to not call a port when they get to where they're going, and you have cargo on board that you want to get off of the ship, and they're not going to go there. But
same problem, but in reverse.
Exactly. But it's not really a phrase. But I mean, there's a lot of phrases in shipping that.
A lot of archaic, from back in the day.
Well, a lot of it too. I mean, back when I very, very first started, part of the company I worked for was that they imported lumber from around the world. So they would chartered vessels. They would charter the whole vessel and fill it with lumber and ship it into the US.
Like do break bulk?
Correct. And so back then, the guy who ran that company was an older man, and he would only do everything by telex. So you do see a lot of that still in shipping, where the verbiage or the way that people communicate is almost like still in telex language. So it's a very shorthand way of saying things sometimes. And you read it because when you're doing a telex, you pay by the word.
Pay by word.
And so everything was just super short. And so for a long time, I would read emails and stuff, and back when, it was a lot of different generation of people, so they would write their emails like they were sending you a telex. Like, all right. And so you see a lot of that still, which is fun, but confusing.
Well, thank you very much for sitting down and
of course
telling us about how you got into this wacky, wild world of coffee.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Another Cup, part of the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network, presented by Kavoya Specialty Coffee and produced by me, Mike Ferguson. Our free use theme music for this episode is Calm Sea by All Media 2024. You can email me with questions, thoughts, ideas, or your next port of call at mike.ferguson@kavoya.com. And as always, thanks for listening.
I need all of that deleted. Thank you. This isn't live right now, going out into the ether.